Hi class, welcome back. So I'm guessing you just watched the introduction to the Biology to Design Spiral, and now we're going to talk about using the Biology to Design Spiral. So as you saw last time, this is what the Biology to Design Spiral looks like, at least the one that we're going to be using for this class. And so you know the rest of the class after this lesson, we'll be using the other design spiral, the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral. So we're just going to spend a little bit here in lesson 4.1 playing with this one, just so you know how to use it and how it works. So we talked about different examples of the Biology to Design, how it plays out. So someone inspired by a burr came up with Velcro. Someone who saw that biofilms don't develop on this kind of red seaweed was inspired to come up with an antibacterial surface. And people who have been inspired by the lotus leaf for a long time and the lotus flower, one of the inspirations led to how does a lotus leaf stay dry and clean when it's such a mucky environment, and that was the inspiration for a self-cleaning surface. So remember, the Biology to Design spiral is used when you're in sort of an inspired, inventive mode. So you see a solution somewhere in biology that inspires you, and you use biology to design to come up with a problem to be solved. So that's, and of course, a solution to that problem based on your inspiration. The steps in the Biology to Design spiral are, as you see in this, this spiral here: discover, abstract, brainstorm, emulate, and then evaluate. And we'll talk briefly about each of those. Discover is what you're already becoming skilled at as designers who are learning to observe nature differently. So the idea is to really observe, and you've been practicing that in your BCI sessions, and hopefully just you're finding that in day-to-day life that your skills for observing have been tuned in a different sort of a way. So if you want to be inspired by nature and inspired as a designer in nature to invent something, you first practice observing. And it really helps, of course, to go outside and spend time outside and spend time exploring outside. Look at things before that maybe you would have before ignored. You can also explore the literature, and by that we mean whether it's popular press having to do, in books having to do with nature, biology of any sort, ecology. You can explore that, as well as scientific literature that you feel comfortable diving into. And just so you know, sometimes biological literature and other science is written such that the abstract and the introduction are understandable to the layperson, then you can get deeper into it from there. You can also watch documentaries like Planet Earth, Discovery, Natural Geographic, whether you watch them on TV or rent them. That's a great way to get exposed to nature in a really entertaining way. And again, when you watch them, you start to observe it with your designer's eye. You can also talk to a biologist. So as you're exploring the natural world, whether it's outside or through media, it's really interesting to talk to a biologist about what you're discovering and what that means and what functions are being served. And it can be a super interesting discussion because most biologists are not trained to look at whatever their field of biology is in this way. So it'll be a great gift to them for you to be sharing with them, looking at nature through a designer's eye. And of course, you can explore Ask Nature. Ask Nature has all kinds of different purposes, and one of which is just to explore, and you can discover new things about what nature can be used for as terms of a source of inspiration. Abstract, and I'm going to whip through this kind of today in this lesson because we're going to go into it in more depth in the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral, but the idea of abstract is you basically reverse engineer the organism. So you want to be able to articulate, describe the strategy that you see, that you're inspired by, and it takes the it'll be in terms of material, form, process, system, or some combination. It's usually some combination of these four things that make up the strategy that performs the function. So you're trying to articulate what that is. In this abstract phase, you'll also look for other examples of organisms that use that strategy. So it's sort of like going back to the discover phase, but as you look at other examples, you start to notice patterns and use that new skill of relentlessly asking why and how. Why does it do it this way, and how does it do that? As you do that, and as you're inspired by one organism, but you start to look for other examples and you see these patterns emerging, then you'll start to be able to identify the underlying design principles that are allowing this, behind the pattern, behind the strategy. And that's when you get to the real core of abstracting how the organism or the process or the system does whatever it is that you're looking to do. One example is a spiral. We see the Fibonacci series spiral as well as a branching pattern based on that geometry all over nature. So that's one of those underlying principles. In this case, it's a form for accomplishing certain functions. So the end of the abstract phase, you'll have articulated, you'll have described in technical terms what you're seeing in the organism. Once you have that, then you can brainstorm. Identify who in the human world needs to perform this function or faces this challenge. And by who, it could be an individual, a consumer group, a demographic, an industry, some function we need to perform, like transporting ourselves, for example. So when you see what that function is and what it does for the organism or the system in nature, say, well, who in the human world needs to perform this function or faces this challenge. And again, sometimes you might need to go back to your inspiring organism and to explore this a little bit. Then again, explore what other functions does this strategy perform. As we talked about earlier, almost everything you see in nature, and also things you don't see, are multifunctional. So things are optimized across a system, remember that? So when you see a strategy, it's often optimized to accomplish several functions, not just one. So try and identify what those other functions are. Also think about what else could the strategy be used for. So not just the many functions that this strategy performs, but it might perform one function or set of functions in the organism, but gosh, maybe it can perform other things in your design. So that's the brainstorming part. That's when you're doing your divergent thinking. In the emulate, you get down to your convergent thinking. You put on your designer's hat, and as we said, you diverge first and then you converge later. So you're going to need to dive deeper into the literature, consult a biologist to really get it right, and really remember to capture the function. So the emulate stage, you take whatever you've abstracted and then all the different ideas you've come up with during your brainstorm session, and you do something with it. You design, okay? That's the emulate phase. And when you're doing this, again, remember to capture the function. It's very easy to get to be so inspired by the beauty and the cleverness of nature that you go off and try to and become more biomorphic. In other words, you're copying the shape and the look and the feel of something. That too is wonderful for its own reasons. However, when we're doing biology to design, the idea is to capture the function that you're seeing, using the strategy that you see. And as we learned last week, you evaluate whatever design concept you come up with against life's principles. And as you learned last week, in doing so, you then identify new ways to meet more of life's principles. And then you can identify new functions that your design could perform with that same strategy, or more functions that it could perform with new strategies. Which leads you into your next lap of the design spiral. So you go through one lap and you end up with the evaluate stage, and it takes you right back into the next phase. Okay? So that's just a brief introduction to how to use the biology to design spiral. What you're going to do next is you're going to have a BCI session where you're going to be looking for ideas from nature, for inspirations for biology to design. And then you're going to get a chance in assignment 4.1b to come up with your own biology to design using the biology to design spiral. So this is just an example of someone who's inspired by what they saw, what caterpillars did and how they suspended themselves in trees to come up with tent designs. Okay, that's it for this little video, and we'll see you in lesson 4.2.